Stone struck stone above the alcove, and the high priestess's hand froze on the cracked gold diadem. The veil hung half lifted, translucent layers trembling where someone had pulled away. Suspicion burned inside the historian at once. The preserved motion looked deliberate. He had come to test a theory, not to witness an incomplete passage. The question was immediate. Had the passage been stopped by a human hand, or had the rite failed under its own strain? He stepped into the chamber with Marta beside him. Marta used her headlamp for close work and kept her voice low. "Look at this seam." Marta, pointing at mortar fractures near the diadem niche. "There are wedge marks. Someone forced this open recently," the historian answered with a clipped breath and a slate of actions. Photograph, measure, record. Suspicion shaped his choices. He did not let romance with myth govern his procedures. The historian had come from a life of archives and dry marginalia. He kept his notebooks like a surgeon kept scalpels. He closed his coat against cold stone and lay a white sheet over the diadem fragment to protect it from breath and lamp oil. He recorded the immediate facts aloud. Scene secured. 2 layers of veil remain attached here. Diadem fractured along a seam at 9 o'clock. His voice was even. His hands moved to lift a corner of the cloth for a closer look. Marta found a scratched marginal note on a plaster fragment while sweeping away dust. She called down to him, "Read this." "There's ink under lime." He bent and read the letters aloud, slow and precise. "Stop the passage. Do not crown." Marta's fingers tightened on the plaster. Her jaw closed. The two of them exchanged no long speeches. Their actions accelerated. Doubt made Marta test each tile edge. Doubt made the historian widen his survey. They reconstructed fresco sequences along the corridor. The painted figures showed 4 staged veils: a birth scene, a death scene, a soil scene, and a figure rising with a crown. The images matched ritual vocabulary the historian had traced in fragments of other palaces. He whispered dates and references to himself, quick citations that Marta recorded into a handheld. The chamber's frescoes gave exact gestures for each veil lift. The painted high priestess raised her hands in 4 defined motions. The pattern read like a manual. Marta spoke in clipped sentences, the way field researchers do when fatigue presses. "If the final crown is withheld, the rite halts. If it halts, containment follows." Someone wanted containment. Her hands moved as she spoke. She lifted a fragment of cloth. The cloth gave off the thick smell of beeswax and oleander smoke. The historian inhaled and felt a small flicker of fear. His fingers tightened on the notebook. That fear changed his method. He double-sealed his camera and asked Marta to mark the seam with chalk. They found the hidden alcove by knocking on a fresco. Marta struck the painted wall and listened for hollow places. The second knock produced a dull echo. Her shoulder forced the panel inward. Dust poured from a seam. The hinge inside was rusted but intact. Marta pried until a narrow gap opened and a narrow strip of veil fell into her palm. She exhaled a single, sharp sound. "This was boxed deliberately," she said. The historian took the veil strip and traced a faint smear of pigment with a gloved finger. He pressed the sample into a labeled bag. He spoke like a man building a case in court. "The residue is ritual oil. There are tool marks on the inner frame. The alcove was meant to keep the final lift from reaching the throne." He paused, checking Marta's face for agreement. Marta nodded, and then asked the question that now lived under every measured observation: who within the cult chose to stop it? The chamber offered no answer. It offered, instead, a motion that the historian did not expect. When he turned the diadem in the lamplight, he saw an inscription along its band. His fingertip traced letters next to a fissure. The letters matched a peculiar formula he had seen only once before in a gloss on a palace decree. He whispered the gloss aloud. The air around his whisper felt colder. His scalp tightened. He placed his lips to the metal and read the name of a line of priestesses long thought extinguished. Alone at the niche, his attention narrowed until the walls contracted into events. He let the diadem rest on his palm, and the inscription activated a reconstruction in his head. The vision took the shape of precise motor sequences rather than vague impressions. He saw the high priestess set the 4 veils in order, heard heel clicks on flagstone, felt the drag of layered cloth over bronze armlets. He watched the high priestess perform the first 3 lifts exactly as the frescoes showed. For each lift he smelled the same oleander and beeswax that clung to the veil strip. The vision was tactile. He reached for the recorded motion. The final lift was where everything broke. In the reconstruction, the high priestess raised the 4th veil, met a resistance, and refused the crowning motion. She drew her hand back slowly, fingers curled around the fabric, and did not place the diadem. The refusal had an edge of choice in it. The historian felt that choice in his teeth. He tried to force the vision further, and a pressure built at the base of his skull. He stopped. He catalogued the sensation as evidence. His next actions were careful. Photograph, measure, notate. Marta spoke from the doorway then, short and firm. "You saw that too?" The historian did not answer immediately. He recorded a note and then replied, "Yes, Marta." The gesture was withheld. It matches a deliberate containment. Marta's hands did not stop moving. She lifted a rusted strip and showed a tiny hole in the stone, bored after the fresco had been applied. "Someone sealed something in here," she said. "They wanted it to remain half-born." Her voice held a tremor at the edge. Their doubt shifted toward fear when a faint light gathered on the center platform. It began as a cool sheen on the stone, and then resolved into a thin figure of reflected gold and shadow. The historian's breath shortened. His fingers tightened on the notebook. He felt the hair along his forearms prick. He did not call it awe. He set the notebook down and moved with measured steps toward the platform. "Stay back, Marta," he said. A layered voice answered him from above the platform. The hidden queen did not speak with a single mouth. The voice overlapped itself 2 or 3 times, like several people speaking the same phrase. "Why do you disturb the bind?" it said. The historian kept his hands visible. He had trained to avoid grand statements, but training did not remove the concrete fact that something else now contested their interpretation. The voice's rhythm contained patience and accusation. "We came to record the right. The historian, we mean to understand." His tone remained flat. He kept one hand on his notebook where the recording device lived. The hidden queen's form pulsed. Her eyes caught the lamplight and returned it like burnished coins. She tilted her head, and in that movement showed the lattice of old tattoos along the collarbone. The air smelled of salt and metal. The queen interrupted his taxonomy with an act. She reached and touched the broken diadem with 2 fingers. The diadem vibrated, and a line of dust lifted into a narrow shaft of light. The crack in the gold widened a fraction, and a small shard dropped onto the stone at the platform's edge. Marta snatched for it and missed. Her glove scraped the floor. The shard spun once and then embedded itself in a hairline groove in the stone. Marta swore. The historian leaned in. Marta marked the shard location. He lifted a small tag and placed it near the groove with gloved care. Marta barked short orders. "Photograph the groove. Photograph the crack. Measure the shard's trajectory." Her voice held new, sharp focus. Fear had sharpened into purpose. The historian matched her rhythm. A rapid exchange followed between the historian and Marta as they took samples. "Marta, run a spectrometer on that residue. On it, note the time code. Keep the lamp stable." "Got it?" The rhythm of their work filled the chamber. Actions replaced speculation. The hidden queen watched them without moving her lips. Her hands folded across the diadem, and the chamber gave off a faint low hum. The reconstruction returned with renewed force. The high priestess completed the final lift during a precise instant in that reconstructed motion. She lifted the veil fully, and the queen stepped across the threshold as if walking from behind a curtain of stone. At that moment, a shadow slipped out from the stonework behind the throne. The shadow did not belong to any living body. It moved like a strip of dark cloth, narrow and purposeful, In the vision, the diadem crumbled under the queen's hand, and the shadow swallowed a sliver of crown. Marta looked up from her samples. "A shadow took the diadem?" she asked. Her voice was short and incredulous. The historian tapped his notebook and admitted the image to his record. Yes, the diadem fractured on contact. A dark shape moved into the masonry. Doubt changed into a new, cold suspicion that someone within the cult had tried to hide that dark shape by sealing the final lift. They argued about whether to pry the groove free. Marta wanted to extract the shard now. If we remove it, we might break the seal. She moved closer. The historian kept his hand on the edge of the platform. He thought of field ethics and of precedent. He thought of ritual logic. Interruptions that contain rather than destroy. If we remove it, we risk what was contained, he said. The conversation sharpened. We have evidence. Marta, we've a diadem fragment. We have tool marks. We have a hidden alcove. The historian counted items on his fingers. We also have a living presence, he said. We must not escalate. There were 3 rapid lines exchanged then as they tested options. Do we seal it? Marta, do we follow? The historian replied. I say we take the shard and go. Marta, it fast. The historian hesitated. His hesitation was not sentimental. It was a decision-making pause that let him measure risk. He felt fear like a chair under his weight. He glanced at the queen. Her tilt remained patient, almost tired. We will take a single fragment as evidence and contain the passage, he said. They executed the decision with strict technique. Marta placed a thin padded clamp over the shard. The historian adjusted the clamp's pressure. He set a small laminated tag and wrote a single line of provenance. Their movements were short commands and confirmations. The clamp clicked. The shard loosened and then came free, leaving a darker trace in the groove. Marta breathed out once and held the fragment up between lamp and shadow. The queen watched the shard in Marta's gloved hand. A faint smile crossed her face, not human but registered by the historian as an index of meaning. She inclined her head and spoke a phrase that layered across the chamber. You bring a tooth of the crown. Her voice rolled like small bells. Marta holds the shard. She spoke to document what she held. The historian recorded the motion and took a wet swab from the groove. He sealed it in a tube. His hands were steady. His fingers trembled only once when he labeled the evidence and then steadied. The chamber responded. The low hum deepened into a resonant note that seemed to come from stone. The queen lifted the final veil with a slow, sovereign motion. The cloth fell away and revealed a narrow threshold beyond the throne. The threshold was not a throne at all, but an opening into darker masonry carved with sigils. The historian felt the chamber's geometry become relevant to action. An exit or an entry, a juncture between rooms. The reconstructed sequence and the living presence converged. The high priestess in the vision completed the crown motion. The diadem crumbled and a shadow uncoiled into the masonry. The living queen's hand closed around empty air where the crown had been. The stone behind the throne showed a hairline fissure where something had withdrawn. Marta's jaw tightened. We must decide now, she said. The decision fell to both of them. Marta argued to take more evidence and return. The historian argued to contain the passage now and leave. They traded 3 quick lines, a short argument that moved like a scalpel. We need samples. Marta, we need to close it. The historian, we can do both. Marta. They executed a compromise. The historian placed the fragment into a lined case. He wrapped it in oil-proof cloth. Marta prepared mortar and a small sealed plate to overlay the groove. Together they fit the plate into place and dribbled fresh lime mortar to hold it. Marta tamped the mortar. The historian smoothed it with gloved fingers, counting seconds for curing. The queen watched each motion without interference. When the final smear of mortar hardened enough to hold, Marta set a numbered seal across the plate and pressed it into the soft lime. She handed the seal to the historian. He set it in the mortar with his thumb. He spoke the record. Seal 1 placed. Evidence, diadem fragment, 1. Containment measure applied. His voice stayed controlled. Marta put down her tools and swabbed her palms on her coat. After the plate handled, the Queen shifted her posture. She stepped back into the threshold as if the motion of their hands had completed some ledger. Her form thinned. She touched the carved sigils with one finger, and the stone replied with a soft click under her touch. "You have delayed the passage," she said. "You have choices still to make." Marta looked at the historian and asked, "Do we open on purpose, or do we leave it sealed?" Her voice did not carry theatricality. It carried field fatigue and the pressure of choice. The historian thought through the consequences. To open might release what the cult had tried to bind. To leave it sealed might allow a mythic will to remain contained and active in the palace. He considered legal procedure, publication, and the safety of the team. He took a breath and made the call. He had authority as the lead investigator. We document, we reseal, we report. We do not pry further tonight." Marta's shoulders dropped in a mixture of relief and frustration. She did not argue. The Queen inclined her head and then did a slow thing. She allowed the last veil to fall into place over the threshold from her side. The motion completed the ritual image without granting the crown. In the final minutes, they recorded a cautious account. The historian spoke into the recorder with methodical phrasing. He documented tool marks, the fragment succession number, the resin analysis, and the presence of a luminous phenomenon. He did not end with moralizing lines. He ended with logistics, chain of custody, storage location, and a directive to keep the chamber secured. He closed the recorder and placed it in his worn notebook. They left with a single shard in a lead case and a sealed plate across the groove. The stair out of the subterranean palace felt steep. Marta carried the sampling kit and the lamp. The historian fitted the evidence case into his satchel and felt its weight as a concrete object. The Queen remained in the threshold, visible as a thin filament of light. She did not follow them. At the top of the stairs, the historian turned once, set his hand on the cold banister, and said to Marta, "We will catalogue everything and keep the record strict." Marta answered, "Marta will catalogue and cross. Check." They both spoke names in short lines to fix responsibility. The historian locked the outer seal over the stair with a numbered tag and noted its code in his field notebook. He filed the recording on a secure drive that night and dressed the fragment in archival wrapping. He wrote a single paragraph of contextual text that reduced the spectacle to evidence. Tool marks, marginal note, hidden alcove, living presence. He closed the case. The final paragraph of his night record ended with a decision made in the chamber. The passage would remain contained, and one fragment would travel as proof. He placed the case into a locked crate and set the crate on the lab table. He turned off the lamp and left the door propped open for Marta to carry evidence out in the morning. The last line he wrote before sleep was a concrete instruction. Diadem sharder, one goes to secure cold storage. Do not unseal without documented oversight. The torch clattered as the high priestess shoved the side door and banged into the antechamber. "The fourth veil is gone," she said, voice hard and immediate. He stepped forward with a bent shoulder and the notebook in his left hand. Suspicion rose through the historian's measured chest the way a fired torch lifts smoke, clear, sharp, and directed at anyone who had been near the hooks that morning. He did not answer immediately. He checked the overturned brazier with a gloved fingertip. Ember ran orange across his palm. The high priestess, her braid tight at the nape, pointed without looking at him. "You moved rubble by the alcove," she said. "You tested the shelf." He kept his hands visible and laid the notebook on a flat stone so she could see the inked measurements. The missing veil and the cracked gold diadem from the earlier night were now a concrete choice. Secure the stair and wait for guild authority, or pursue whoever had taken the veil and risk exposing the subterranean chambers. Within 5 sentences, the central problem presented itself plainly. The ritual calendar demanded the final veil be lifted at midnight. If the veil did not hang, the rite could not conclude as prescribed, and the cult's timetable would be broken. The historian's suspicion, his guiding emotion route, made him listen for small sounds and test each claim. He had come as an outside investigator, but carried enough knowledge of ritual law to know what a missing veil meant. An immediate decision, potential sabotage, and a threat to the group's ritual continuity. He was in his mid-40s, lean coat buttoned, spectacles pushed low on his nose. He kept the notebook open to the page where he had sketched the throne alcove and the position of each hook. He had arrived the day after the diadem incident recorded in the palace ledger. Stone struck stone above the alcove, and the veil half lifted while the high priestess' hand rested on a cracked diadem. That image had driven him here. The broken diadem lay wrapped in cloth on a low bench. The priestess' ochre streak still clung to the lintel. "Tell me exactly what you saw," he said. His voice was low, he wrote as she spoke. I found the hook empty and ochre smudged beneath it. The linen ring was torn, the words were short. She did not add hypothesis or speculation. He recorded the tear pattern and asked for measurements. She walked the line of the chamber and tapped the stone at each hook, counting with her fingertip like a metronome. Her hands did not tremble. An early change in feeling arrived when the vault warden opened the service door and let lantern light fall in uneven shapes. He carried a toppled seal in his palm and a dust, smeared expression. Tracks from the outer service door, small, many prints leading toward the inner stair. The historian crouched to examine the seal. The vault warden held the wooden peg between thumb and forefinger and pushed it back into place, and then drew it out again, as if showing the act of tampering could explain the danger. Doubter placed a portion of the historian's suspicion. The footprint pattern did not match the palace servants he knew. The prints were narrow and the stride short. The warden's jaw set as he offered the observation. "Someone who knows how to smudge dust," he said. "Someone careful." The priestess looked at the stair and then at the warden. "Did you secure the stair after the diadem?" she asked. He answered with the bureaucratic truth. He had, but only for the night shift. Another team had access in daylight. The conversation moved like a measured ritual, each participant placing a claim and testing the other. They chose to follow the prints rather than immediately lock the stair. That decision marked the first real turning point. The high priestess argued for sealing the chamber until ritual council could meet. "We cannot perform the last lifting without the fourth veil. To try is to invite rupture. The historian, ritual law does not remove human agency. We can follow the tracks and recover the veil or discover its fate." Their argument produced a rapid exchange of lines. "We risk the ritual," said the priestess. "We risk exposure," said the warden. "We risk losing what the queen expects," the priestess, emphasizing the name she did not use lightly. "Then we decide who the queen is for this night," the historian. The terse back and forth lasted 4 lines and focused decision on immediate action. The warden took the lantern and led the way. The priestess followed, robe tails gathering dust. The historian trailed, notebook clutched, watching the way the priestess's fingers brushed thresholds. Her gestures were the proof she deferred to ritual grammar rather than impulse. They found the inner stair landing cluttered with knocked paves and a smear of ochre across the newel stone. The stair smelled faintly of a coal ember and the salt from rooms above. The prints continued downward and then widened at the base where the corridor split. A small voice called from the darker corridor, and a young acolyte stumbled into the lantern glow, clutching a piece of cracked gold. He slammed the fragment into the historian's palm and gasped, "It broke under my hand. I saw them near the service door. He could not finish the accusation. He had dirt on his knees and his tunic was torn." Surprise entered with the acolyte's revelation. The group had anticipated a divine withdrawal. Instead, they faced human action. The acolyte's short sentences revealed panic. "I saw cloaked people at the outer gate, kneeling by the carts," he said. the warden the acolyte for names. The boy could only describe faces half, hidden beneath hoods, and a hand that carried a workman's mark. That detail redirected the historian's suspicion toward guild involvement. He checked the diadem fragment for a craftsman's stamp. He found a faint mark, an angular emblem used by the coastal guild, not palace smiths. The vault warden swore softly and paced. If the guild made that crown, then this is not only theft. It is politics between workshops and palace authority. The priestess pressed her thumb to the diadem's chip as if feeling the object's intent. Politics or not, she said. The veil was taken from our hooks. Someone intentionally broke our covenant. Her phrasing tightened the group's sense of betrayal. The historian recorded the mark and the exchange in shorthand and felt the second emotion shift arrive, from doubt into a concise, edged fear. Fear expressed itself in practical actions, closing doors, magnifying the prints with oil lamplight, testing the diadem fragment against the throne's carved relief. They examined the throne room next. The chamber door stood ajar. Lantern light showed the central stone fueling a faint residue on the throne's seat, pale and slightly reflective. The historian knelt and scraped a sample with a fingernail, then sealed it in a scrap of linen. The priestess traced the throne rim with a fingertip and spoke in a quieter cadence. "She sat here within the hour," she said. "The mark is fresh." Her words implied an urgent question. Had the queen been present and then removed, or had she merely appeared and left? Silence pressed on the group. Even the warden's breath slowed while they considered threshold law and the calendar. They retreated to the small ritual alcove to read the timetable. A clay tablet hanging near the niche showed the ordered lifts. Veil 1 at dawn, Veil 2 at noon, Veil 3 at dusk, Veil 4 at midnight. The priestess unfolded a narrow strip of painted textile that marked specific invocations. We lift the last veil at midnight to close the passage. If we do not lift it, the threshold may remain open until the next cycle and attract. She stopped and pressed her lips together. The omission worked as a visible shudder. The historian saw the action and wrote risk of threshold exposure in the margin. The warden spoke sharply. "We choose now. We either delay the rite and call the city watch, or attempt the rite without the queen." The priestess kept her eyes on the timetable and then on the hooks where veils normally sat. The air between them tightened not with metaphors but with choices. The historian felt the third emotion shift, from fear toward something like resolve. He moved to the niche, took out the diadem fragment, and placed it on the small stone pedestal. He then tested his notation against the painted textile. The sequence suggested that if a diadem was present in any form, the rite might anchor to the symbol rather than the living presence. The priestess hesitated. If we attempt the rite with a fragment, the queen may not bind fully. She may come fractured. Her voice had a measured cadence when she used ritual terms. The historian, we can adapt the liturgy in 3 small places and produce continuity. Or we delay and call the watch. Your choice makes an outcome. He did not urge dramatic language. He listed actions to frame the decision. The priestess and warden debated again, 3 to 5 short lines trading quickly. "If we delay, the chambers are at risk of exposure to the street," said the warden. "If we proceed, the queen may not appear whole," said the priestess. "We can attempt with the fragment and reinforce the invocation. The historian, who will chant." The priestess, "You will?" The historian. The question of who would chant revealed power and trust. The priestess stepped forward and adjusted her armlets. "I will lead," she said. Her choice resolved who would take sacrificial risk. The warden nodded, reluctant but determined. The young acolyte, still breathless, said nothing and watched the priestess fold her robes. An unexpected shift occurred when the historian inspected the diadem's workshop mark again under an oil lens and recognized a second detail. A small notch cut into the inner rim in a way used by certain city smiths to fit a secret binding. "This notch," he said, "is not accidental. It is an interface for a binding strip that would make the diadem part of a mechanical assembly used in civic pageantry, not private offerings. The recognition altered the group's understanding. What they had assumed was a palace object now bore an outside craft intervention. Betrayal sharpened into a specific kind. Collaboration between a guild and an outside faction. The warden's voice became clipped. Then someone from the guild brought it in to manipulate our right. He turned to the priestess. "Do you know of any magistrates who would interfere?" He for names. She answered with a short list. 3 city officials who had influence over public rituals. The dialogue moved fast, 3 lines in quick exchange that assigned motive to action. The priestess, "One name matters tonight. Iron of the docksmiths. He resents the palace's monopoly on ritual craft." The historian wrote the name and circled it. They returned to the inner sanctum to prepare. The priestess arranged 3 veils on her arms and kept the hooks empty where the 4th should hang. The historian set the diadem fragment on the low altar and marked the exact spot with powdered chalk. He instructed the warden to position men at the stair and the service doors and to keep 2 lanterns burning. He the acolyte to stand at the outer threshold with a list of names of those allowed inside. Each task was a concrete response to the threat. The group's motions were precise and short. As midnight approached, the corridor quieted. The priestess moved through the 3 veils with a slow ritualized cadence and chanted brief invocations beneath her breath. The historian kept time and spoke only when necessary. He cleared his throat once and said, "Now." The priestess lifted the first veil. The second followed. With each lift, the light in the room changed. Not metaphorically, but physically. The brazious flame touched different stone faces and threw new angles of shadow across carvings. The hidden Queen's presence had always been signaled by a particular reflection on the throne rim, and that reflected light started to appear faint and cold. Then the sudden event that rearranged everything. A small rumble in the corridor, the sound of boots that were not the warden's men. Lantern light flashed as someone pushed through the outer door and stood in the threshold, a figure covered in a coarse cloak, face shadowed. The young acolyte cried out, and cut off. The priestess froze with the 3rd veil half lifted. The historian felt the moment narrow down to a single choice and acted. He raised the chalked diadem fragment and placed it on the pedestal exactly as he had rehearsed. The priestess intoned a vow and lifted the final veil in a single motion. The figure in the doorway stepped forward and fell to his knees. A voice called out, rough with exhaustion, "I did not mean to harm." The cloak fell back and showed a face the warden did not expect. Iron the docksmith, breathing hard and holding a leather satchel. Shock and a twist entered at once. Iron's arrival changed the meaning of the theft from clandestine theft to attempted restitution. He dropped the satchel and pushed his hands out. "I brought the veil back," he said, "that you would not notice if we cut the loop. I kept the veil because I wanted my son to see the Queen. He is ill and the city watch would not allow him near the palace." His voice broke with human pleading. The priestess' jaw tightened. The warden's fingers curled around the lantern handle. The historian wrote the exchange and watched how the priestess' face registered betrayal and a possibility of mercy. They argued quickly, exchange after exchange. The warden demanded punishment. The priestess questions about the veil's treatment. Iron answered in short bursts, naming a network of dock workers who had traded favors for access. The historian pressed for facts and found 2 more surprises. The veil had not been sold or discarded. It had been moved to a safe house and then returned intact. The notch in the diadem had been added by a smith sympathetic to dock families, so the diadem could be shared in civic displays. The motive was private grief, not a political plot, at least for Iron. The priestess had to choose. She had the power to call a punitive ritual or to accept the veil and proceed with the rite. Her hands tightened on the fabric, as if testing its grain. "We will proceed. But Iron will be watched and bound to the covenant." That line anchored the group's final decision. The historian watched the priestess step back toward the altar and resume her cadence. The climax arrived in the inner sanctum. The priestess lifted the remaining 3 veils in sequence, with the historian setting the diadem fragment into place, and the warden sealing the doors. Iron stood to one side, bound by a rope of woven service tokens held by the warden's men. The priestess spoke the final invocation, and a pale light pooled on the throne. The hidden queen's form emerged in pieces. First a hand, then a torso, then the faint image of a face with pale green, gold eyes. The light was not steady. It cracked and reformed like a lamp with a loose wick. The queen's voice, layered and thin, spoke across the chamber and said, in a tone both distant and exact, "Who calls and who returns my shape?" The room reacted with concrete actions. The acolyte knelt and pressed his forehead to the floor. The warden held the door tighter. The priestess answered with the invocation practiced for years, and then adapted a phrase the historian suggested to bind the fragmentary presence. Precise syllables that asked the queen to accept a repaired diadem as a locus. The queen's face flickered. At one point, the light in her eyes split, and the diadem fragment slid on the pedestal as if nudged by an invisible hand. A thin piece of gold shimmered and then dulled. The queen's arrival was fractured and not whole. Her voice layered again and said, "I come, but I am not one body. You have cut me small and asked me to stay." The priestess's throat closed. She did not cry out, but tightened her grip on the fabrics and chanted faster, pressing physical cadence into invocation. The historian's action was direct. He placed the diadem fragment at a specific angle and spoke the additional binding formula. The queen's form shivered and the light pooled, but it did not resolve into a full person. Instead, a pale residue fell onto the throne's seat and into the air like very fine ash. After the ritual, the priestess walked to the throne and ran her fingers through the residue. She tasted it with a fingertip and did not flinch. The historian measured the residue's weight and the length of time it clung to the stone. The warden took the bound iron by the elbow and led him to the outer chamber where the watch would speak with him. The acolyte placed the 4th veil back on its hook, though it hung slack. The priestess accepted, with a precise intake of breath, that the cult's covenant had been altered. We did not restore what was whole. We made an accommodation." The line contained acceptance and an operational plan. They argued over words for a short while. Punishment versus pardon, delay versus adaptation. The conclusion came through action. The priestess directed that the diadem fragment be wrapped and attached to the inner sanctum as an interim relic. The warden ordered records changed and placed 2 guards at the stair with explicit instructions. The historian copied placements and liturgical changes into his notebook and added margin notes so the ritual could be reproduced and tracked. He wrote the change in instruction in plain language: use fragment, reinforce incantation in 3 lines, restrict public access. A final twist followed. As they set the new protocol in motion, the historian noticed a faint workshop print on the diadem's reverse side that matched a trader known to carry messages for certain magistrates. He recognized the mark from a ledger he had read months earlier suggesting covert exchanges of ritual objects. The discovery suggested there had been a larger plan, and not only Iron's plea. He set his pen down and looked at the priestess. "This was mediated," he said. "Someone used the guild as a channel." The priestess nodded and tightened a cord on her robe as if preparing for further negotiation. The chapter closed with concrete actions rather than reflection. The warden led Iron to the stair. The acolyte swept dust from the alcove and rehung the 3 ceremonial veils. The priestess sat before the throne and adjusted the cracked diadem in its cloth wrap. The historian closed the notebook, slid the fragment into its protective pouch, and placed both on a low bench. He stood and pushed the stone slab over the alcove entrance, aligning the edge so that the seam nearly disappeared. He took the lantern from the warden and set it at the foot of the stair. "Lock the outer door at first light," he said. record any visitors, and do not move the diadem without me present." The priestess answered with one short line. "We will keep the covenant altered and known." He left the subterranean rooms with a list of names, a new record of liturgical changes, and the feel of suspicion transformed into cautious stewardship. He had shifted from suspicion to doubt, then to fear, and finally into deliberate action. The immediate crisis had been resolved, the rite completed, the veil recovered, the queen manifested in part, but the ledger mark he had found meant consequences would follow. He stepped into the corridor, pulled his coat tighter, and carried the diadem fragment in his journal case as he moved toward the stair where dawn would bring city voices and new decisions. The stone door gave with a grinding protest. The historian pushed his shoulder into the carved slab and smelled wet dust and iron. Thread snagged on his sleeve and a smear of ochre marked the lintel, where fabric had been torn away. Suspicion tightened his jaw so quickly that his hand went to the notebook in his coat. The central problem announced itself in the lintel's evidence. The fourth veil had been stolen, and the cult's central rite could not be completed. He had come to confirm patterns, not to watch an inside betrayal unravel beneath his watch. He lowered himself into the narrow corridor, coat brushing the cool stone, and used his lamp to read the weave of fabric still clinging to the carved sigils. The high priestess held the lamp with both hands. She did not speak at first. The historian heard the memory of the earlier night. Stone struck stone above the alcove, and the high priestess's hand had frozen on a cracked gold diadem. He had written that moment down in neat lines. Now the diadem lay half, buried in a toppled seal in the alcove below, a detail he had not expected to revisit so soon. He opened the notebook and traced the margin with a fingertip, counting the differences between the predictable ritual and what they now faced. "It's gone." The high priestess. And the single word cut the corridor as if with a blade. Her name rarely in ordinary speech, so he named her when the lamps tilted and she did not. "High priestess," she answered by tightening her braid, a small motion the historian read as anger directed at the theft and at the priesthood's failure. He stepped closer, lowering his lamp until the ribbon of light found the torn threads. The threads were linen, worked with crimson dye. The ochre smear had the shape of 4 fingers dragged across the lintel. Who would take it? The high priestess. Her voice was even, measured, but the historian felt the faint tremor at the base of it, the kind that comes when authority is forced to answer. He lifted a glove and touched the ochre, then withdrew his hand when the high priestess's eyes sharpened. "Do not touch the sigils," she warned. "Not yet." The ritual marks retained trace pressure. Her cadence shifted into ritualized instructions without chanting, short, precise commands. The historian replaced his glove and nodded. He had trained himself to convert suspicion into steps. His suspicion now demanded an evidence-led sweep. "We secure the threshold," he said. "We inventory the chamber. We speak to the acolytes one by one." The high priestess moved to the door and examined the hinge. She called a name aloud. "Melia, stand where I can see you." The lamp revealed a face in the antechamber. The temple acolyte drew himself to the light with the guilty shape of someone counting on protection. They pressed into the candlelit antechamber, and the high priestess accused, listing possibilities with a voice that sharpened to accusation. Her anger fed the room. It made the air hard. "Someone inside took the veil," she said. "Someone who could pass the guards. Someone who touched the diadem." The historian held back a retort and produced a line from his notes instead. "We found the toppled seal below the altar. The diadem is cracked half under rubble. There is a smear on the lintel and torn linen. Those are physical facts." He spoke the facts slowly, pinning the anger to measurable evidence. "Facts do not speak for us when one of our own hides the crowd." The high priestess replied, and her words struck the acolyte silent. He blinked, and the historian could see fear push the acolyte's shoulders inward. This was the first emotion shift. Suspicion hardened into confrontation. The high priestess's accusation pulled the others toward immediate loyalty or immediate flight. An acolyte stepped from a side alcove, pressed his palms together as though to hold himself. "I saw nothing, High Priestess," he said. His voice had the thin quality of someone who had rehearsed repeated denials. The historian watched the acolyte's hands. They were trembling. The acolyte, whom the historian would later write as a slender, shadowed presence named Karen, avoided the high priestess's gaze. The high priestess did not believe the denial. She was a ritualist. Her decisions came from testing the order of events. "Karen, where did you sleep last night?" she asked. "By the lower cistern." Karen answered, "I heard nothing at the hour." The high priestess's lips pinched. The historian watched a second emotion shift in the room. Doubt moved toward suspicion, and then toward guarded anger. He remembered the torch clattering in the previous night, and how the high priestess had shouted that the fourth veil was gone. That night the torch noise had been an external marker. Now the acolyte's denials made the same noise internal. They found the toppled seal in the collapsed altar alcove beneath frescoed walls. The fresco's paint flaked where someone had scraped at the mortar. The diadem lay half buried, cracked at the back, the gold leaf broken into narrow teeth. Acolytes gathered. Some whispered. The high priestess knelt and reached for the diadem with fingers that did not tremble. The historian kept his hand on the notebook and watched her throat work when she inhaled. "Who touched this?" she demanded. Karen's shoulders collapsed and he answered too fast. "I put it there to hide it," he said. The confession fell into the alcove, and the room stilled with the hard acoustics of stone. The high priestess's eyes widened, not with surprise but with a calculation of consequence. This was the second major emotional shift, from suspicion and accusation into sudden, concrete disclosure. "You what?" The historian. The voice that emerged from him was not the dry scholar he used in lectures. It held the edge of someone who had come to witness cult praxis, and now had to address a human justification. "I took it, Karen," shoulders curling inward. "I hid the veil under rubble. I thought to keep her safe, so outsiders could not find a living queen among us." His speech dropped into short clauses, a defense built of patchwork reasons. The high priestess pushed herself to her feet and struck the stone with the flat of her palm. "Karen," she said, "you have undone centuries of ritual logic. The veil is not a garment, it is a public instrument. You have changed the people's claim." Her voice was cold with the measured fury of someone who measures outcomes rather than emotions. "I did it for the hidden queen, Karen." And his explanation bent toward pity, to keep the cult's ideal from being exposed as a woman who can be captured or killed. He lowered his eyes, and the high priestess's face shifted. The sternness gave way to a brief, furious comprehension of the moral calculation. The room turned into a field where different convictions pressed against each other. The historian recorded each small movement. He wrote sentences that matched gestures. The way Karen's knuckles whitened, the way the high priestess's braid loosened, the way the diadem's cracked teeth reflected the lamp like animal teeth. He did not narrate inner feelings. He mapped the body language and the choices that followed. The acolyte's claim complicated motive. The historian's short questions to force clarity. "Karen, tell me exactly when you moved the veil," he said. The boy answered in clipped time marks. "After the last chant, while the guards counted stones before midnight." The historian marked those times against the altar's shift and the toppled seal's angle. The high priestess listened, hands folded, and then said two words that reframed the case. "Bring her forward." Karen's face blanched. She ran deeper into the vaults when I placed the veil. I thought she would hide, not claim. I did not mean." He could not finish. The corridor toward the hidden throne room was a shadowed approach with frescoed figures frozen in mid-step. The lamps threw long, literal shadows of the figures, and the high priestess began a chant without words, an incantation of motion. Hands lifted and dropped, fingers describing sealing gestures. The historian counted each gesture like a researcher counting code. When the boy's fingers brushed the diadem, the air delivered a physical change. Light pooled along the throne and a faint luminous figure appeared, not as mist but as a defined form on the raised seat. It had a human outline with an internal sheen. The high priestess staggered as though the floor had dipped under her feet. She closed her mouth on a sound. The acolyte's shoulders recoiled. The sudden presence on the throne forced a new alignment in the room. Some acolytes dropped to their knees. Others grabbed lamps and stepped forward with instruments of ritual. The high priestess reached for the threshold and held it. The authority of the cult became a contest of posture and of who would break first. The presence did not speak. It sat with the quiet gravity of a body that had been expected and denied. High priestess, the historian, is that? He did not finish the question about whether the figure was a deity or a human claim. His training prevented him from imposing labels. The physical markers told more than words could. She cut him off with a single, disciplined motion, and the chant returned, louder in its restrained cadence. Do not name her until the veils pass. Do not claim a crown before the rite completes. Her voice snapped the practice back into rules. Yet the tilt of her shoulders showed how authority wavered when the cult's ontology became suddenly literal. This moment, apparitional shimmer and power shift, changed loyalties. Acolytes who had been silent stepped forward to touch the hem of the priestly robes, to test which side of the ritual they served. The historian watched the shifting alliances as if they were tectonic plates, small slips that would, over hours, reshape the cult's structure. Then came the climax. The raised threshold before the throne room crowded with people. The high priestess stood at the center, the 4 layered veils folded at her belt. She did not look at the figure on the throne. She looked at the priesthood. The room held its breath in short, staccato noises, breaths, the creak of leather, the scraping of sandals. The high priestess lifted the first veil in a slow, deliberate motion. The action was measured and ceremonial, and therefore irreversible once begun. When the second veil lifted, the hidden queen's face remained veiled, but a human throat moved. Lamps rattled as hands clenched. The historian noted the physical reactions. A clenched jaw, a swallowed sound, a trembling in one acolyte's wrist. The high priestess's fingers hesitated on the third veil. She held the linen between thumb and forefinger and read a register of ritual signs sewn into the weave. Karen pressed forward then, short sentences spilling out. She is only a woman. She had no right to be queen. She begged me to hide her because she had no proof of lineage. His words tumbled in short bursts so the historian could record them. She ate with the servants. She swept the corridors. She kept to corners. I thought keeping the veil would protect. He stopped because the presence on the throne gave a sound that was not a voice, but the layered breathing of several people in one chest. The high priestess's hands trembled once and then steadied. The third veil lifted and the room's energy leaned forward. When the final veil lifted, the hidden queen was revealed as a living woman wearing the stolen veil. Hair clinging with dust, the cracked diadem on her brow, eyes that reflected lamplight like burnished metal. The high priestess's authority collapsed in the moment the cult's symbolic core unmasked a human claimant. Gasps ricocheted inside the stone. A short, sharp collision of voices followed. She is not the goddess. One acolyte said plainly, she is Maria of the service stair. Another countered, Maria. The high priestess repeated, Maria of the service stair. The revealed woman, called Maria in multiple whispers, shook as though the weight of the diadem was heavier than brass. There followed rapid exchanges. The high priestess confronted Maria with 3 direct questions, each line brief and clipped. Did you take a vow? Did you claim the crown? Who helped you? Maria answered in short phrases, no vow. She said, no claim. They me to wear it once, in jest. I did not mean. Her sentences broke into fragments under accusation. A short argument erupted, 6 lines that moved fast between the high priestess and Karen. Then the historian interjected with a single clarifying question: who you to wear it? The room paused. Even breath became a small event. Maria's cheeks hollowed when she named a figure that had not yet been present in this chapter. An elder acolyte whose name the historian had not seen in the rolls, but who had appeared in the frescoes as a patron. The naming altered the frame. This was the required twist. The theft was not simply a young acolyte's misguided protection. It was an action seeded by an older hand. The high priestess barked 3 short commands to the acolytes. Secure the thresholds, do not let the woman flee, bring the elder before me. The acolytes moved. This enforced a series of external events that changed the pressure inside the cult again. The elder was not in the immediate chamber. Someone had seen him pass deeper into the vault. The pursuit split the group. The revealed woman staggered and then fled deeper into the vaults, the diadem catching a lamp's flame in a jagged flash. The high priestess doubled over, and the room erupted into shouts. Karen collapsed to his knees and began to cry aloud, telling the same justification again and again in a brittle voice. The historian seized the moment to document the altered veils and the cracked diadem, pressing lamp light into the fabric and the metal. He recorded the angles, the way the gold had broken, the placements of dirt around the diadem's teeth. They followed the sound of her footsteps through a corridor that had been painted with climbing vines. The lamps tilted and threw those vines into literal movement across the plaster. The high priestess moved without ceremony now, hands stripped of ritual restraint, and struck a stone with the palm of her hand. Her action forced acolytes to obey a different logic, immediate pursuit rather than ceremonial procedure. This was another emotional shift, from structured authority into urgent, guttural action. They found evidence of the flight. Dragged linen, a scrap of the veil looped over a stair baluster, the smell of olander smoke where someone had brushed through incense. The elder's footprints appeared, larger and muddier. An acolyte spat and swore under his breath. The historian wrote that detail verbatim. Each external discovery arrived and pushed the group to a new choice point. At the small ruined sacristy where they took temporary shelter, the acolyte's confession deepened. Karen admitted the veil had been stolen to conceal a human claimant, to preserve the memory of the goddess as an ideal instead of admitting a living ruler who could be endangered. He spoke in staccato lines that revealed fear. They would have brought soldiers if they saw a living queen. They would have cut us down. The high priestess listened, and then asked 3 direct, clinical questions about who else had knowledge. Karen named 2 other acolytes and 1 elder by a clipped nickname. The revelation reconfigured the historian's initial theory. Inside the sacristy, the high priestess examined the remaining veils and the cracked diadem. She moved slowly, methodically, as though the faint motions of her hands could stitch the cult's logic back together. The historian placed the cracked diadem on a slab and annotated the break patterns, an impact from the side, a twisting force at the rear. He wrote the physical causality rather than speculation about meaning. The group reached a decision point. The high priestess proposed restoring the ritual publicly and reasserting the cult's rules, while a small faction argued to hide the human claimant and declare the rite a symbolic performance. They argued in short exchanges, 5 to 7 lines, voices overlapping with the kind of practical urgency that changes outcomes. The historian listened. He could not, as a witness, decide the cult's fate. He could only record the decisions and the actors who made them. When dawn edged pale light down a stair, the high priestess rehung the remaining veils on ancient hooks in an empty subterranean hall. She worked with quiet movements. Fingers finding the loops, a small sound when a hook caught linen. The historian wrote her action in a single sentence. She then did something he had not expected. She placed the cracked diadem on a low stone near the veils and sealed it with a strip of linen, tying the knot herself. That knot was a concrete consequence, an action that bound the material evidence to a new ritually sanctioned object. Karen made his confession again, quieter, and then left the sacristy on a path that had no lamps. The elder remained at large, the hidden queen had fled. The cult's hierarchy stood divided by specific actions and names. The historian closed his notebook and described the moment with unadorned facts. The veils hung, one missing, the diadem bound, the threshold unresolved. He paused long enough to place a physical seal, a line in his notebook noting who had said what, who had touched what, and the time marks recorded by the lamps. He did not write conclusions. He recorded that the cult's promise was half, preserved by actions, a veil gone, a woman revealed, an elder absent. That inventory became the chapter's concrete aftertaste. Outside the sacristy, a footfall sounded from deeper in the vaults. The sound was single, deliberate, not hurried. The high priestess looked up. Her hand went to her braid. The historian snapped the lamp closed and put the notebook away. The chapter ended on that footfall, an immediate, situational beat that tied back to the theft and forced the next choice. He lunged and closed his fingers around the thin cloth as it slid from the high priestess' hand. The veil ripped at the palm and left a scent of beeswax and oleander. Suspicion tightened the historian's jaw. He had arrived to test a theory and now had to act on the certainty that someone meant to finish the rite tonight. He stamped his boot against loose mortar and pushed the high priestess back from the hanging threads. The high priestess held out a hand. "Give it here," she said. "Do not pull at the hooks." Her voice kept its low cadence, but it carried a raw edge. The historian did not release the cloth. He kept one thumb over the torn edge and looked toward the throne niche. The stone seat was bare. The cracked gold diadem lay on its plinth, rim split open like a mouth. The opening minutes establish what the historian knows and why he will not let the scene stand. He had seen the diadem before. Chapter 1 recorded how the high priestess' hand froze on that same diadem after a stone struck the alcove. He had read the smear of ochre, felt the lintel threads snag his sleeve in Chapter 3. And he remembered the torch clattering when the fourth veil was declared missing in Chapter 2. Those earlier facts line up now into a single urgent problem. Someone intends to complete the veil transfer with the diadem tonight. Who took it? The historian. He kept his voice steady. The high priestess answered in ritual logic and avoided the word thief. Someone moved the diadem and the seal. The final unveiling must be rejoined to the living bond, she said. Give it to me, historian. We will not let a stranger bind her to this place. Her fingers brushed her scar as she spoke. The ochre streak glinted under the chamber light. The first external event arrives when the antechamber door bangs open. A young acolyte stumbles in, palm smashed against fabric, carrying the missing fourth veil. The acolyte drops to his knees and holds the veil like a wound. Blood slicks his hand. It was deeper under the eastern stairs. He gasps. They took the seal, and his sentence breaks into a cough. He puts the veil between his knees as if sheltering it. The high priestess takes the veil with steady hands and presses it against her chest. "Tell me names," she says. The acolyte tries to speak, but only points at the threshold toward the lower vault. He blurts. They moved the diadem toward the sacrarium. Someone opened the old gate. The historian steps forward and digs a finger into the torn edge of the diadem on the plinth. He finds a notch inside the fracture, a shallow channel that fits a living line of touch. This is the first emotional shift. Suspicion becomes focused pursuit. The historian slams the notebook shut, tucks it under his arm, and moves for the threshold. He will follow the history of actions. The torn veil, the diadem's notch, the acolyte's direction. The high priestess follows with measured steps and a chant under her breath that she uses to steady volunteers before any transfer. They cross the carved lintel where threads had snagged before. The historian sweeps his fingers over the ochre mark on the stone and notes the grain of the pigment. He remembers the smear from Chapter 3 and hears the clatter again in his head, not as a memory metaphor, but as a precise sound he recorded in his notebook. A torch hitting stone and the scraping of fabric. At the threshold a faint shimmer coils around the raised lip of the throne room door. The light is layered. It moves in thin ribbons that the high priestess follows with her eyes. The hidden queen's presence announces itself not in words, but as a voice, like vibration that makes metal at the room's edge ring. The acolyte falls silent and presses his palm to the lintel. Do you feel that? The high priestess asks. She does not wait for the answer. The historian puts his hand to the same stone and recognizes the frequency the high priestess described in old fragments. A resonance that answers to particular cloth threads and a gold surface. He thinks of the diadem's notch and of the ritual binding that required a living contact. The question who will supply that contact lands like a metal weight in his chest. The second emotional shift turns focus from pursuit to dread. The shimmer tightens and a partial image of a woman appears at the threshold. A pale face, an auburn sweep of hair, eyes like burnished metal. The high priestess staggers back. She is nearer. The high priestess whispers, and the historian hears the old cadence break into fear through the sharpness of her breath. Acolyte speaks abruptly. They set hooks deeper under the east vault. High priestess. They moved stones. I followed blood. He stops when the hidden queen's partial form lifts a hand, and the chamber answers with a low resonant hum. The acolyte's pupils widen. He puts the veil to his mouth and inhales the cloth's scent as if drawing the ritual into himself. In the next set of paragraphs the group finds new evidence. A toppled seal, a scrap of diadem backing caught on jagged mortar, and a clear smear of ochre on a lower stair. The historian points to the notch. This notch is meant for skin, he says, not for rope, not for a cord. It expects bone or flesh to seat the connection. The high priestess kneels and traces the notch with a fingertip. She winces and lifts a hand to her ritual scar. You in your notes the transfer required a bond, the historian says, speaking quickly. Are we certain the rite cannot be completed with a substitute? The rites recorded in the fragments do not allow it. The high priestess replies, they say. Transfer by acceptance or by taking. Acceptance is consent. Taking requires a living anchor. Someone forced the taking elsewhere. She says the last word without a chant. A brief confrontation begins at the inner chamber. The historian demands the diadem and the high priestess answers with ritual logic. Voices sharpen. The high priestess steps between the historian and the plinth. You will not bind her like an experiment, she says. You catalogue the objects. We keep the covenant. You cannot. I documented the covenant. The historian says I will not let a forced binding stand. Who else knows the steps? Who else can move this? High priestess cuts him off. You do not understand the cost. Ledger it in your book and leave it. You will not spill blood to prove a theory. The argument escalates. 3 rapid back and forth lines follow. High priestess, the diadem's notch is not proof of force. It is proof of need. Then prove need without another life. The acolyte interrupts. There is another name, he says, make. He crawled under the east gate with a lantern. I saw him hide something in the sacrarium. The high priestess turns to him, eyes hard. Make is not a name in our order. She says Make is an outsider. The acolyte nods once and looks at the ground. This exchange reveals a named secondary figure beyond the 3 main ones. Make is the outsider tied to the theft. That twist reframes earlier evidence. The theft was deliberate, not random. The historian hears the change and recalculates rotes. A transfer across hidden stairs, a secret gate, a living bond that could be taken by force. The group moves deeper. They pass the toppled seal that Chapter 1 described. Stone struck stone above the alcove. The historian kneels and lifts a shard of pottery with a fingerprint in ochre along its rim. He puts the shard in his notebook. The print matches the smear at the lintel, he says. The same hand pulled the veil. The high priestess' shoulders tighten. She traces the ochre on her jawline with her thumb and breathes out a short chant that steadies her hands. At this point the hidden queen's image grows more defined. The shimmer at the threshold becomes a partial face that listens and tilts. The historian feels his pulse tighten in a measurable way. He counts 3 beats and keeps his finger steady on the notebook's spine. The acolyte backs away and drops the veil on the stone floor. The cloth lands with a small sound like a coin hitting mortar. The cliffhanger arrives when the hidden queen's hand extends and touches the outer lip of the threshold. The room answers with a pull at certain threads. Candles gutter and a small stone slips free from the arch. The high priestess cries out, "Stop!" The historian lunges forward, but a voice layered, soft and multiple, says his name without moving its lips. The voice alters everything. It is the unexpected reveal that the hidden queen knows the historian's identity, or can at least reach into the present with relic knowledge. This forced recognition changes how the historian engages. He will no longer act as a detached recorder. He becomes a participant. They reach the inner chamber strewn with ritual debris. A short scuffle breaks out over the diadem. The historian tries to take it. The high priestess pulls. Their hands meet on the cracked rim. Acolyte cries out, "Stop!" The notch Ivy seen marks on the inside. It takes a joining. He pushes his palm into the diadem's fracture and produces a smear of ochre that matches the high priestess' scar. He looks up at her. "You used it," he says. "You bound once, didn't you?" This is the twist that changes the inward understanding of the high priestess' motives. She does not deny it. Instead, she nods and says, "Once, to hold the line against outsiders, to anchor her while the city burned." The admission is precise. It is not a confession of guilt in abstract terms. It is an inventory of action. The emotional chord here shifts again. Betrayal shades into resignation. The high priestess' hands tremble as she shows the notch imprint on her palm. The historian reads this physical detail and revises his old theory. The high priestess once accepted the bond. Now the diadem is broken. Someone means to complete the bond either by offering a willing hand or by taking another's life. Argument turns to a possible solution. The historian lays out choices in short sentences. We can reassemble the diadem and cleanse the notch. We can seal the sacrarium, or we can stop whoever moves to take a life. The high priestess looks at him and says simply, "We cannot unbind what has been given. We can only choose who holds the final measure." The pace accelerates toward the climax. The high priestess mounts the raised steps to the throne and sets the cracked diadem on the plinth. She moves with ritual precision and slows her breath in a measured cadence. The historic enterer, he whose notes are lifelines, feels the room's balance change underfoot. The final unveiling proceeds exactly at the ritual time that fragment suggested. A falling of a last veil matched to a heartbeat. The high priestess tugs the 4th veil over the diadem. The acolyte cries, "No!" and lunges to the plinth. The historian grabs his arm. "Don't touch," he says. High priestess speaks a line of invocation that the historian recognizes from a scratched fragment he has carried for years. The words are a sequence of demands. Consent, passage, witness. The high priestess looks at the historian. She lifts her chin and says, "Choose." The tone is a sentence that contains action and consequence. Now the chamber becomes mechanically active. Light coils tighten into a single braided thread that dips toward the notch. The diadem emits a sound like metal settling into a lock. The high priestess hesitates a breath longer than her training allows. She either offers herself or forces the historian into the binding. She moves to place her scarred jaw against the diadem's rim. The violent decision collapses into a single gesture. The high priestess places her palm across the fracture and presses with deliberate force. The historian recognizes the action as identical to the acolyte's earlier smear. The diadem accepts the contact and the room answers with a low, shifting gravity that presses like an invisible palm on each shoulder. The hidden queen steps forward into partial form and the chamber responds. In the collision of intent, ritual mechanics, and the hidden queen's presence there is a human cost. The high priestess's shoulders fold. Her breath becomes shallow. The acolyte screams and scrabbles for the diadem. His fingers close on a corner and pull free a thin hairline shard. "Don't take it," the historian says, but the movement is too late. The diadem splits further and a sliver drops to the floor. The hidden queen's face is almost whole now. She does not move like a living body. She moves like a weight shifting in a well. Her voice layers before she speaks, and the sound is a bargain. One will pass, one will remain. One will remember. The high priestess collapses, limp, and the hidden queen inclines her head toward the acolyte. The acolyte clutches the shard as though holding a rosary. The aftershock is a bargaining scene rendered in concrete acts. The hidden queen offers a fragile exchange. She will withdraw complete sovereignty if the acolyte agrees to bear memory and service. The acolyte's lips tremble. He looks at the high priestess on the floor, and then at the historian's notebook. "I will take it," he says. "I will keep her in the way you ask. I will feel what she felt and speak what she requires." The historian watches the acolyte as he lays his palm against the diadem's notch and accepts a small, painful pressure that runs along his wrist. The bargain changes the distribution of power. Cult authority narrows and is exchanged. The high priestess survives in broken form. The acolyte takes a living bond he did not expect. And the hidden queen withdraws into a less complete presence that nevertheless alters the order of the cult. The historian writes down the exact exchange, a living memory transferred at the cost of the high priestess's mobility. In the following steadying minutes, the historian records what he can. He notes the acolyte's hand tremor, the high priestess's slow return to awareness, the way the diadem's cracked rim now carries an imprint of 2 palms. He feels the need to document who chose what and why. He asks the high priestess a short question. "Did you consent when you first bound her?" She meets his gaze and answers in 2 lines, "I consented to hold the city. I did not consent for us to lose ourselves to memory alone. We thought the rites would protect more than they took." She touches the ochre streak on her jawline, and the motion is small and factual. The acolyte speaks then, naming his new role. "My name is Listen. I will keep the ledger of her demands and take the watch." He stands straighter, even as his palm bears the pressure of the rite. He addresses the high priestess with a name for the first time. "High priestess, you will rest. I will keep the door." The high priestess nods once, slow. The final sequence focuses on sealing. The historian arranges the diadem beside the veil and notes the new pattern. A broken crown paired with a cloth that carries the scent of beeswax, olander, and iron. He records the acolyte's full name and the precise time when the hidden queen's presence shifted from full to partial. He writes the physical facts: a notch, a smear, a split, a palm scar. Outside the vault, someone bangs at a distant stone. It is a routine arrival, nothing dramatic. The historian does not dramatize the knock. He counts the steps back to the outer wall, places the veil into a chest, and drapes the cracked diadem atop it. Listen watches with his hand still pressed to the notch. They seal the chamber. The historian lifts the stone slab and slides it into place, listening for the exact click the builders left as their lock. He sets the broken diadem beside the sealed veil. The high priestess is led by 2 attendants toward a recess to lie beneath new layers of cloth. Listen stays by the plinth and reads from a short list of duties that the high priestess whispers to him. The last paragraphs tie the material facts to the chapter's emotional root and leave a concrete beat. Suspicion guided the historian's first movement and drove him to follow a chain of marks in stone and cloth. Doubt shifted into focused pursuit when the acolyte arrived. Fear rose at the threshold when the hidden queen coalesced. Clarity arrived in the moment the diadem accepted a palm. The final decision redistributed authority through a physical exchange. A living bond transferred, a diadem split, and a witness appointed. The historian closes his notebook on the last line he writes. Listen, formerly young acolyte, now bound to memory, high priestess, scarred, survived but wounded, hidden queen, partial and bargaining. He slides the stone slab until it grinds shut. The sound seals more than the room. It records the concrete result of choices made in this subterranean palace. He leaves with the exact measurements of ochre on his sleeve, and the knowledge that the cult's secret has not been ended, but altered by human choices. Outside, the torchlight catches the historian's face. He breathes and counts a single steady cadence. He will return to his notes, to the fragments he collects, and to the ledger that now includes a living witness named Listen. The final beat is a concrete action. He lays the cracked diadem beside the sealed veil and turns the key in a shallow groove to set the slab. The door closes with a scrape of stone on stone. That scrape is the last sound of the chapter. It anchors the outcome. A choice made, an injury taken, a new keeper sworn. There is no abstract resolution. There is only the ledger, the sealed chamber, and the precise, recorded facts that the historian will carry forward.